Stanley Kubrick's 1999 film Eyes Wide Shut is, on the surface, a film about the physical act of intimacy. Just about every scene in the film revolves around people doing it, or trying to do it, or fantasizing about doing it, or being angry that someone else fantasized about doing it, and ultimately some of the bad consequences that come about as a result of doing it. However, some of the more mysterious events of the film leave many wondering if it doesn't have some kind of deeper message about devil-worshipping elites who secretly rule the world. It's kind of a bizarre movie. Just how is it that an argument between a husband and a wife can lead a man to go on a journey from the seedy underbelly of New York to the forbidden trysts of the upper classes? This film seems to connect things which, for most people, have nothing to do with each other. However, this is precisely what makes this story so uniquely insightful. Aristotle said that it takes a genius to perceive the similarities in things which appear dissimilar. And when a genius is able to show us the similarities in things, the way things imitate each other, by combining different things within a single metaphor, allowing us to grasp that similarity, we will be able to discover something about these disparate topics, which we did not see before. And our eyes will be wide open. Structurally, the center of the film revolves around the question of what it means to be married, specifically, what it means to be faithful to your husband or wife. It puts two ordinary people in front of us, a medical doctor named Bill Harford and his wife Alice, and shows us how they are tempted to cheat on each other and to flirt with other people, and even to have fantasies about other people. And the film then asks us, what are the consequences of this? What does it mean to desire another person? What does it mean for us to give in to these fantasies about other people? What exactly is going on in this mysterious realm of imagination, consciousness, and dreams? This realm which even science still cannot explain, where entire stories and cities and worlds can exist, seemingly within the 3-pound confines of the human brain. What kind of effect does this unconfinable imagination have on a person outside of us? Are we capable of such a close connection with another person that we can be affected by that person's imagination? Just what kind of power does a fantasy actually have? And as we will see, Eyes Wide Shut takes the act of lust and of cheating, and perhaps surprisingly, frames them within harrowing misadventures where life itself is at stake and death is a real possibility. The film begins with Bill and Alice attending a Christmas party hosted by one of Bill's very wealthy patients. While there, one of the guests tries to seduce Alice, and two young women try to seduce Bill. But before anything happens, Bill is called away in order to help a hooker who has OD'd in the bathroom upstairs. And while both Bill and Alice indulge in a lot of flirting and quite obvious desires, neither of them is physically unfaithful. And when Bill and Alice get home, they get it on with each other. It seems like everything's okay in their relationship, but the next night, the couple discuss their unfulfilled fantasies. Alice is bothered by the fact that Bill was being hit on by a couple of floozies, as well as Bill's job as a doctor in general, which puts Bill in intimate situations with other women. Bill, by contrast, doesn't worry about his wife at all, because he says that all women, including his wife, are naturally faithful, and so he not only trusts that his wife would not cheat on him, but he tries to ease Alice's mind by telling her that his commitment to their marriage not only keeps him faithful, but stops him from even fantasizing about other women. And it's at this point that Alice shatters Bill's illusions about women, as well as his confidence in his marriage and his wife. And she does this by confessing a fantasy she had about another man. This revelation disturbs Bill. What good is surface-level marital fidelity when his wife is overcome by seemingly involuntary lust, which makes her obsess over other men, and even makes her willing to give up her family and her future, if only she would have an opportunity to do so? There are a lot of loose strings here, but this conversation is interrupted, seemingly out of nowhere, as Bill is suddenly called away to a patient's house, but we can see that he is still haunted by his wife's fantasy. It's as if she has already been unfaithful just by having a fantasy. It's as if the fantasy was as real as actually living it out.
I think I have to go over there and show my face.
Once Bill is at the patient's house, the patient's daughter tries to seduce Bill, as if to confirm what Alice had said. It's as if being in a vulnerable state draws people to find solace in the ultimate act of love.
You're very upset right now, and I don't think you realize what you're saying.
I love you.
Mary, we barely know each other.
It seems like Alice is right. Women really do want to sleep with the handsome doctor they barely know, an aspect of human psychology which Bill was blind to. While Bill does resist Marion's advances, he also, in a lot of ways, now finds himself in a similarly vulnerable position. He's lost his bearings, he doesn't know what to believe, and he feels powerless. And he will try to conquer this vulnerability in the same way that Marion tries to conquer it, through physical intimacy. Just pay attention to what Bill does afterward. Walking down the street, Bill runs into a group of rowdy college boys who kind of push him around a bit and are ready for a fight. Well, so much for being a doctor. That kind of success and status and wealth doesn't seem to help much if you get into a fight on the street. Bill is unwilling to stand up for himself, and this encounter is just another layer on top of Bill's feelings of impotence. It's almost as if rising in status invariably forces a person to leave a part of their self-sufficiency behind. Well, perhaps that's beside the point. Immediately after this, Bill falls in with a hooker, who approaches him and allures him, one might say involuntarily. But after some convincing, Bill decides to go back to her apartment. Perhaps this will make him feel like he's back in control of his life. It doesn't matter what his wife does, whether in her fantasies or in reality. He's in control of his life, and he can sleep with whoever he wants to. At this point, Bill is totally willing to cheat on his wife, which, it just so happens, challenges the validity of what he had told his wife back in their bedroom. It turns out that his commitment to marriage is not enough to keep him faithful. In fact, it seems like Bill's commitment is conditional, and it seems that in Bill's mind, the fact that his wife simply had an intense desire for another man gives him the right to go and actually cheat on her, as if the two were on equal footing. However, before anything can happen, Alice calls Bill's cell phone, and Bill decides to leave without sealing the deal. So much for never lying to his wife, but at least Bill still seems to have some pangs of conscience. As he is walking down the street, Bill comes to a jazz club where his old friend Nick Nightingale is tickling the ivories. As the two men are catching up, Nick describes a crazy gig where he plays blindfolded, but occasionally he catches glimpses of the debauchery that goes on there. Debauchery, you say? Well, Bill is interested. Good, faithful, constant Bill. Naturally, Bill will have to have a costume and a mask to get in and participate in this debauchery. So, Bill goes to rent a costume. In the process, he is met with yet another odd encounter. He discovers the costume seller's daughter with two men. And it seems like there are going to be some unpleasant consequences surrounding this scenario, but we don't linger here. Once the costume is secured, Bill heads out to the mansion, and there he finds some kind of cultic ritual taking place, along with plenty of the aforementioned debauchery. A masked woman comes alongside Bill, something that has happened a couple times now, but this time instead of trying to seduce him, she warns him that he is in danger and that he should leave immediately. He is not supposed to be there. But instead of leaving, Bill decides to stay and watch, as if he's just fantasizing himself into these situations. And eventually, he is just about ready to do the dirty when the same masked woman again stops him from doing that and tries to get him to leave yet again. However, it is now ultimately too late. Bill has stayed too long, and he is discovered. The Master of Ceremonies unmasks Bill, then tells him to remove his clothes. It seems something bad is in store for Bill, but before anything can happen, the masked woman intercedes one last time on his behalf, willing to take his punishment, whatever that may be. And so Bill is allowed to leave, but with the warning to not say a word about anything that he has seen, or else there will be dire consequences. Well, it's been a long and crazy night, and Bill finally comes home, and he finds Alice having a dream about being with the naval officer that she had fantasized about before, as well as being with other men, all while Bill was watching. What's uncanny is that her dream seems to correspond quite a bit to what we have just seen Bill going through. She says that they were both naked in the city and he went off to find clothes. Alice feels better when Bill leaves, and her dream shifts to a garden, wherein haps a debaucherous gathering, where Alice is participating while Bill is just watching. And for some reason, Alice feels an uncontrollable urge to just laugh at her husband. Bill, understandably, doesn't seem so amused. We don't get a verbal response from him, but we do see his face. Is he making some kind of a connection between her dream and the events that he lived? Or is he just feeling guilt, or maybe even anger about Alice's dream? The screen fades to black. As with so many Kubrick films, Eyes Wide Shut is divided into two parts, and the second part, which begins here, focuses on trying to resolve the conflicts of the previous night. First of all, Bill tries to go and find Nick Nightingale, only to find that Nick was roughed up and hurried out of town at 5 a.m. When Bill goes to return his costume, he finds that the costume seller has basically sold his daughter into a not very good profession. And the two guys who were locked up in his shop last night are released, just as Bill has been released from the mansion. In and through all of this, Bill is still obsessing over his own wife's fantasy, which for some reason seems to lead him to go back to the mansion from the night before. However, he is given an ominous warning. What is going on in Bill's head? Is he bothered by the grim events of the previous night? Or is he simply frustrated by his wife and determined to cheat on her, to do in real life what she did in her dreams? This seems to be at least partially the case, because after Bill is run off from the mansion, he not only keeps hearing his wife's words in his head, but he then tries to contact his patient's daughter, for a follow-up. But her fiancé answers the phone, and he gives up on that. So, as a last resort, Bill then goes back to see the prostitute he met, only to be told by her roommate that she just found out that she is HIV positive. So while Bill had been totally ready to do some extracurricular activities with the roommate, this jarring revelation dampens the mood and gives Bill good reason to think again and leave.
I think, maybe I better be going.
The world is a whole lot more unknown than Bill had realized, and there seems to be hidden dangers everywhere. And even though Bill is constantly slipping into dangerous scenarios, it's uncanny how he seems to be saved out of each and every one. It's almost like they are all connected somehow. The hookers, the mansion, even the Christmas party at the beginning, where Bill was saved from cheating on his wife. Speaking of which, we cut to the street, where the ominous music from the cult trial is playing. And uh-oh, Bill is being tailed. He buys a paper and ducks into a coffee shop and discovers that the girl who OD'd at Victor's party has OD'd again. Going to the hospital, he finds that she has unfortunately passed. Suspecting that she might be the one who sacrificed herself for him at the mansion, Bill goes to the morgue to identify her. And while Bill can't quite be sure, it is soon confirmed for us that she was the very woman who offered to take Bill's place at the mansion. We learn this from Bill's patient, Victor, because it turns out Victor was at the cult ceremony. Victor claims that the whole trial where the woman redeemed Bill, it was all a charade, just to scare Bill into keeping quiet. The woman who passed away wasn't taken out by some cabal of occultist elites. Rather, she just OD'd at her own apartment, like she did the night of Victor's Christmas party. But this time, no one was there to save her. It's a plausible story, but is Victor being honest? He sure has a motive to cover things up, to make them look as innocent as possible, but ultimately we can't be sure. Although there does seem to be a vague threat in Ziegler's parting words, which sure doesn't sound very innocent.
Nobody killed anybody. Someone died. It happens all the time. But life goes on. It always does. Until it doesn't. But you know that, don't you?
When Bill returns to his home, he sees the mask from the night before lying on the pillow next to his wife. At which point, he breaks down and says, "I'll tell you everything." Off-screen, Bill tells everything he has been through. He has indeed been unmasked. He has shown his face, and it seems that he has been saved. Alice responds, saying that they should be thankful that they survived their adventures, whether they were real or only a dream. Hold on, only a dream? Is Alice saying that what Bill experienced was real and that what she experienced was only a dream? Or is she saying that they are unable to tell whether what they both experienced was real or only a dream? Is it possible that Bill has simply been fantasizing or dreaming this whole time? And even if not, it's startling to hear Alice mention the possibility of being harmed, even by a dream. The idea of not surviving their adventures.
Maybe I think we should be grateful. Grateful that we've managed to survive through all of our adventures.
In fact, Bill does not seem too sure that either of them have survived unscathed.
Are you sure of that?
And Alice simply responds that the reality of a single night, or of a whole lifetime, can never be the whole truth. Presumably she means that there is an opportunity to make redemptive choices going forward. They can live and heal, negating the power of the fantasies and the choices that they once made. A mistake that we made yesterday doesn't exist by itself forever, but rather it exists in the forever changing context of what we choose to do in the future, tomorrow, and the day after that. While the vast majority of truth out in the universe does exist independent of us, we don't get to decide whether the second law of thermodynamics is true, whether Socrates existed in the past, or whether God exists beyond all time. There is nevertheless an aspect of our own lives in which we do join in creating the truth. Namely, we create it by living our lives forward and making choices. You cannot determine the truth of the past, or change the fact of your birth, nor can you necessarily determine what is going to happen to you tomorrow, but you can decide the truth of how you are going to respond to tomorrow. You can decide whether the truth is going to be that you are a faithful, honorable person, or a base and licentious one who hides behind a mask. And the idea that the truth of a whole lifetime is not the whole truth, well, that's a doozy. Bill responds to this in a similarly cryptic way, saying that no dream is ever just a dream. And what could he possibly mean by this? All the way back when Kubrick had finished working on A Clockwork Orange, he said in an interview with Michel Simon, "There is also a novel by Arthur Schnitzler, Rhapsody, a dream novel, which I intend to do, but on which I have not yet started to work. It's a difficult book to describe. What good book isn't? It explores the sexual ambivalence of a happy marriage and tries to equate the importance of sexual dreams and might-have-beens with reality." Eventually, Kubrick would adapt that novel, and that film became Eyes Wide Shut. Thus, we can see that the idea which Kubrick is exploring in Eyes Wide Shut is the idea that dreams and fantasies are equal to reality, at least in importance. This is most explicit in the film, in Bill's response to Alice's fantasies. Just about everything he does in the film is a direct response, not to anything horrible that she actually does, but to her desires, her wandering imaginations, and her dreams about another man. Her fantasies have some kind of real power. They rock his world and spur him on a journey. And the reason why is that every fantasy bespeaks some reality. Our desires reveal something about us. Alice's fantasies are not just harmless pictures flowing disinterestedly through her head. They say something about her heart, her character, who she is. And in this mysterious thing called marriage, where two people intertwine their lives so that they rise and fall with one another, trust is not built only on the external actions of a spouse. It's also built on the inner, hidden source of those actions, which is the heart, or the mind, the same source as our fantasies. You could say that this is the conflict which launches the film, so to speak. However, the character development of the film, the way in which our main protagonist Bill changes, is that he comes to learn that his own fantasies also have this seismic power. This is why, even though the second and third acts of the film seem just as real as the first act, many suggest that these events are either partly or entirely a series of dreams going on in Bill's head and revealing who he truly is. And this is an idea which is only further reinforced by the film's source material. If we look to Arthur Schnitzler's novel, Rhapsody, a dream novel, or in German, Traumnovelle, we can see that even though the novel or novella is set in the early 20th century in Vienna during Mardi Gras instead of being set in New York during Christmas, the events of the film still follow the rough outline of the novel pretty faithfully. And what's most relevant to us here is that when the protagonist of the novel, a man named Dr. Fridolin, leaves his home after a tense back and forth with his wife, in which they reveal their fantasies to each other, the novel drops hints that most of what happens afterward is a dream, or at least isn't quite real. For example, when Fridolin leaves his house, he has to unbutton his coat because all of a sudden it's gotten very warm, even though there had been a blizzard the night before that left over a foot of snow on the ground, and now the snow is almost completely gone. And the imagery of spring and warmth are used to frame Fridolin's erotic escapades throughout the night. But that's not all. There are even more direct comments on Fridolin's state of mind as well. For example, when he encounters the ladies of the night, the novel says he was in a narrow street in which only a few doubtful-looking women were strolling about in pitiful attempts to bag their game. It's phantom-like, he thought. And in retrospect, the students too, with their blue caps, suddenly seemed unreal. And the same was true of Marianne, her fiancé, her uncle and aunt, all of whom he pictured standing hand in hand around the deathbed of the old counselor. Albertina too, whom he could see in his mind's eye, soundly sleeping, her arms folded under her head, and even his child lying in the narrow white brass bed, rolled up in a heap. All of them seemed to belong to another world. Although this idea made him shudder a bit, it also reassured him, for it seemed to free him from all responsibility and to loosen all the bonds of human relationship. As Fridolin goes on through the night, the dreamlike quality seems to grow in potency. Ever since this evening's conversation with Albertina, he was moving farther and farther away from his everyday existence into some strange and distant world. And finally, as Fridolin is returning from the forbidden party, he wonders to himself if everything he experienced wasn't some kind of hallucination. Perhaps he was already ill. Wasn't he feverish? Perhaps at this moment he was lying at home in bed, and everything he thought he had experienced was merely delirium. Fridolin opened his eyes as wide as possible, passed his hand over his forehead and cheeks, and felt his pulse. It scarcely beat faster. Everything was all right. He was completely awake. As with Eyes Wide Shut, we never get crystal clear confirmation of whether Fridolin was dreaming or not. We only get hints and inferences. But then again, this is partly the point. If Schnitzler and Kubrick really wanted to explore the idea that desires and fantasies do have some co-equal status with actions, then what better way to portray a fantasy or a dream than as if it were indistinguishable from reality itself, from the rest of life, as we live it when we are awake. As for Fridolin, he definitely sees his wife's fantasies and desires as being just as bad as actually cheating on him. At one point he reflects, but if for instance he should meet the young Dane with whom Albertina... Oh, nonsense, what was he thinking of? Well, after all, it was just as bad as if she had been his mistress. Even worse. Fantasizing is even worse than physically doing it? Giving your heart to something is worse than if you had done something physically without your heart being in it? Well, in fact, Fridolin vows to get revenge on his wife, simply because of her dreams. This is why Fridolin, and presumably Bill as well, try to go back out to Somerton again, why he revisits the hooker and tries to contact Marion. Quote, he swore to himself that he would resume and conclude all of them. He would then faithfully report them, and so take vengeance on this woman who had revealed herself as faithless, cruel, and treacherous, and whom he now believed he hated more than he had ever loved her. And the most delightful part was that at some future time, long after Albertina fancied herself secure in the peacefulness of marriage and of family life, he would confess to her, with a superior smile, all of his sins, in retribution for the bitter and shameful things she had committed against him in a dream. If you're like me, then the idea that Eyes Wide Shut is just a dream seems to cheapen the movie, at least at first. Why should I care about what's going on here if most of these things are not real? Well, the answer is that in the world of Eyes Wide Shut, dreams are a vehicle of truth. They reveal reality. Not only do these dreams reveal the individual, something which most of us would say is also true in real life, which by itself is enough to make us marvel at the human psyche, for just as Plato envisaged every individual as an entire city-state in his Republic, in Eyes Wide Shut, one man is seen to contain an entire New York City. But what's even more significant about these dreams is that in the story world of Eyes Wide Shut, they don't just reveal who Bill Harford really is, they actually reveal the meaning behind things in his everyday waking life. They reveal who other people really are. Just consider Bill's first experience after arguing with his wife. If we consider this episode as a dream, it's plausible to see Marion as a doppelganger for Alice, and it's even more obvious that Carl is a double for Bill. The quote-unquote real Bill is, in this dream scenario, now in the role of the man who is the object of a woman's desperate, unfaithful desires. And thus this dream allows Bill to see what's behind the curtain, so to speak. He sees what Carl doesn't see. And since Carl is a representation of Bill himself, Bill is therefore able to see what he too had previously been unaware of. In Schnitzler's novel, the grieving daughter, Mary Ann, causes Fridolin to think not just about his wife, but the fantasy she had about the Danish officer as well. Quote, "At the same time, he thought about his wife, without knowing why, and he was conscious of some bitterness and a vague animosity against the man with the yellow handbag on the hotel stairs in Denmark." As the night progresses, the various dream sequences comment more and more specifically on the night of the Ziegler's Christmas party, revealing what it really was and what was really going on beneath the surface. Now think about how those two models want to take Bill to where the rainbow ends.
Don't you want to go where the rainbow ends?
Well, now that depends where that is.
Well, in the course of his dream, he actually goes there in the form of the costume shop. And there he finds a kind of reverse image of the Christmas party. Instead of two women seducing a man, there are two men with a girl. Schnitzler's novel is even more upfront. There, the two men, who are dressed in red, clearly mirror the two women who, at the beginning of the novel, promised to seduce Fridolin and were wearing red dominoes, which are a kind of mask. Yeah, there's a whole rabbit hole to go down. Bill is able to see that the consequence of this tryst is that the two men end up locked up, held for ransom, so to speak, as a consequence of their desires. The girl ends up selling her body, and her apparent delight and her initiation of the tryst, again, not only confirms Alice's claims about female promiscuity, but it also is a mirror of the Christmas party, as the girl also represents Bill's own naivete. Indeed, this girl is a haunting figure because, like Bill and Alice, she is seemingly unaware of the dangers that await down this road. Again, turning to Schnitzler's novel, Fridolin is convinced of some unknown, unspoken danger threatening her. In Eyes Wide Shut, the danger which this girl faces is best exemplified by the fates of the other two hookers in the film. And that, of course, brings us to the most vivid and horrifying revelation of the Ziegler's Christmas party, which is none other than the infamous cultic party at Somerton. The two parties are like film negatives of each other, with many aspects being inverted, but it is still the same image. Consider first the similar elements. Nick Nightingale, of course, plays at both parties, and both parties are for the elites of society. Victor and his wife are both present. At the Christmas party, they are dressed in black and red, the same colors as the costumes of the mansion. The line, "That's not possible," is repeated at both parties, and both times they refer to a refusal to engage in unfaithful behavior.
I must see you again.
That's impossible.
Why?
Because I'm married.
Will you come with me?
That's impossible.
Why?
Because it could cost me my life, and possibly yours.
And Bill is taken by the arm at both parties. He doesn't necessarily initiate, he allows himself to be led astray. Of course, the same girl ODs at both parties, or as a result of both parties, a fact which Victor wants to keep secret in both instances. And finally, in both of these cases, the woman's proverbial sacrifice saves Bill from destroying his marriage, and it seems, in some mysterious sense, from destroying himself. Wherever these dreams might come from, it's as if Bill is being warned about the dangers behind seemingly innocent acts of flirtation or fantasizing, or even that there is physical danger behind being unfaithful. It's showing him from a different angle that he is naive, so that standing outside of himself, so to speak, he can see how whenever he sees someone else engaging in something that he was about to engage in, he can be startled and disturbed. Danger is around every corner. And the Somerton mansion is the burning core, where heat is at the most deadly temperatures. Even just being there is itself dangerous. and it seems that the only reason that he is allowed to leave alive is because of a substitutionary sacrifice. And this is merely a culmination of a pattern that has been going on throughout the film. When Bill was with the prostitute, he was getting into a situation where, we later learn, there was, in fact, actual physical danger. He only escapes when his wife intervenes by calling him. When the two models wanted to take him to where the rainbow ends, he is saved, seemingly, only when the hooker upstairs ODs, the same hooker who saves Bill's life at the Somerton party. So while it might not seem like Bill is in any danger at the Ziegler's Christmas party, it's actually Alice who raises the question of whether or not she would be all right if she went with the Hungarian.
He'd be all right on his own a little longer.
Yes. But will I?
Of course you will.
No. I really have to go.
The function of the dream is to reveal the dangers that lie behind infidelity which, in waking life, we might not be aware of. And it's Somerton Mansion which most viscerally displays, perhaps only symbolically, the danger which Bill and Alice were potentially facing. When Fridolin is pondering the dubious-looking ladies, he thinks to himself, she also might lead to a fatal end, only not as quickly as a duel. Even at the home of the deceased patient, it all seemed unreal and phantom-like. He felt as if he had escaped from something, not so much from an adventure, but rather from a melancholy spell, the power of which he was trying to break. It might seem kind of melodramatic to say that Somerton is the true meaning of the Ziegler's Christmas party. The former is dark, brooding, haunting, threatening, a world of shadows and, ultimately, of evil. Whereas the latter is light and frivolous, seemingly quite innocent in comparison. But then again, that is just how Bill, and especially Ziegler, and frankly most people, tend to see cheating. It may be bad, but not that bad. It's not like you're a member of a cult or anything. If Somerton seems like an alien world, it's only because it's taking our naively mundane view of marriage and positioning marriage and infidelity beneath the vault of infinity itself. Here we see that infidelity is elevated far above the level of mere pleasure, or even of mere fun. It's elevated to the level of reverence, to religion, and to worship. Somerton is the place where the kind of infidelity which is seen everywhere in the film, whether at the Zieglers or even among common people, is placed into its full ethical context. We see that people are not wandering, but worshiping. Why would you cheat on your spouse? Why would you see a prostitute? Why would you pursue something that not only debases your life, but could destroy your life, or even your body? It's because you are devoted to something at the expense of all of those other things. It's because you are worshiping something that is willing to sacrifice your life. You are bending the knee for the thing which guides us, and there is no one who is not guided, who has no stars shining upon his course, is the thing to which we bow. In Schnitzler's novel, the Forbidden Party scene is not necessarily occultic, but it is mockingly religious. Quote, 16 to 20 people, masked and dressed as monks and nuns, were walking up and down. The gently swelling strains of Italian church music came from above. Everything seemed too serious, too intense, too uncanny for a masquerade prank. A woman's voice joined the strains of the organ, and an old Italian sacred aria resounded through the room. They all stood still and listened, and Fridolin surrendered himself for a moment to the wondrously swelling melody. A soft voice suddenly whispered from behind, "Don't turn around. There's still a chance for you to get away. You don't belong here. If it's discovered, it will go hard with you." The song was now ringing through the room. The organ had a new sound, which was anything but sacred. It was worldly, voluptuous, and pealing. In place of the organ, a piano had suddenly chimed in with its worldly and brazen tunes. Fridolin at once recognized Nachtigall's wild and inflammatory touch. The woman's voice, which had been so reverent a moment before, had vanished with a last wild, voluptuous outburst, through the ceiling as it were, into infinity. The men and women who were dressed as monks and nuns throw off their clothes to reveal underneath that the men are dressed as officers or noblemen, while the women are completely naked. Here, the officers clearly reference the man which Fridolin's wife had fantasized about. In fact, in the novel, the password to get into the forbidden party is not Fidelio, it's Denmark. Denmark is where Fridolin and his wife had been on vacation when Albertina fantasized about the officer. The women here could thus be seen as representing Fridolin's wife, his fears about her, or his prejudice against her, or perhaps more than anything, how her secret fantasies have made her a stranger to him. Schnitzler writes, he realized that each of these women would forever be a mystery, and that the enigma of their large eyes peering at him from beneath the black masks would remain unsolved. Fridolin is particularly obsessed by the woman who tries to save him by convincing him to leave, and who ultimately sacrifices herself for him. And during the party, he wants to get a room with her, but after the party, he is completely obsessed with discovering her identity, and the idea that she represents his wife is made all but completely explicit when Schnitzler writes, during the time since he had read the account in the paper, he had pictured the whose face he didn't know as having the features of Albertina. In fact, he now shuddered to realize that his wife had constantly been in his mind's eye as the woman he was seeking. We might see the monk and nun costumes to be archetypal of purity. At first, the partiers seem so pure that they are virginal, but this is revealed to be a cover, a disguise, just as Fridolin had assumed his wife to be faithful, and indeed, as far as her physical body goes, as she has been, but underneath her body, so to speak, in her mind, in the place that only she has direct access to, she has been unfaithful. She is not what she appears to be on the surface, and the same is true for nearly everyone in Eyes Wide Shut. And to serve lust means entering into a kind of secret society, a world of hidden identities, lies, deceptions, and masks. For some, like the Hungarian, this grand deception is charming. It's fun. This is reflected in the game-like aspects of costumes and masks. From African traditional religion down to modern Halloween, humans delight in hiding their identities, taking on personas, even if it's completely innocent, or perhaps if they are doing something that they're not supposed to do. Masks give people the kind of anonymity that allows them to do things that would normally be frowned upon. Even Fridolin fantasizes about indulging in the pleasures of deceiving people, even in his everyday life. Quote, yes, to betray, to deceive, to lie, to play a part, before Marianne, before Albertina, before the good Dr. Rodinger, before the whole world, to lead a sort of double life, to be the capable, reliable physician with a future before him, the upright husband and head of a family, and at the same time, a libertine, a seducer, a cynic who played with people, with men and women, just as the spirit moved him. That seemed to him, at the time, very delightful. But Eyes Wide Shut shows us the danger in this seemingly charming game. Within the realm of this film, trying to find fulfillment and pleasure outside of marriage is a dangerous endeavor. So dangerous that even the most rich and powerful, who have the most status in society, have to resort to masking themselves in order to enjoy unfaithfulness. Even Ziegler, at his Christmas party, has to rely on the medical discretion of Bill to keep his lascivious practices secret. It turns out that even unfaithfulness requires a certain kind of faithfulness, a certain kind of fidelio, rules and loyalties and threats. The Somerton Party reveals the paradox of status and power. On the one hand, these people have incredible power, even the power of life and death over seemingly normal people like Bill. Yet on the other hand, the very fact that they have to resort to extreme secrecy demonstrates the vulnerability of the position they are in. In the scene where Ziegler tries to explain things to Bill, Victor is both menacing, yet desperate, fearful. The reason why the Somerton Party is such a powerful symbol for promiscuity and marital infidelity is because it is so true to life. The rich and powerful really would, and really do, try to hide certain aspects of their lives and identities when they indulge in unsavory activities, just as a married couple feels the need to hide aspects of themselves from each other when they do the same things, even if only in their imaginations. There's no doubt that these events comment on Bill's marriage, in one way or another. But is that because he is receiving revelations from deep inside himself via a dream? Or is it because the universal patterns of human life imitate each other and can therefore comment on each other? If I may be allowed to put forward my own conjecture, I would say that the events of Eyes Wide Shut are probably mostly real, yet they are also dreams, insofar as they comment, like dreams, on who Bill is. Perhaps the most profound idea of all is that real life can be charged with dreamlike significance, that our actions and experiences can reveal the deeper meanings of our feelings, our doubts, fears, and hopes, just as there is some significance in the narratives which are crafted involuntarily in our sleeping imagination. There is also a message in the narrative of our real lives, though we are usually too involved in it to step back and, seeing ourselves as a character in a story, behold what our actions and choices mean, or what the ceremonies of other groups or secret societies might tell us about our own flaws and proclivities. The far-reaching streets of the city and the gated estates of the ultra-wealthy are simply concentric circles expanding from the singular point which begins in every individual human heart. Of course, one remembers some dreams, but there must be others one completely forgets, of which nothing remains but a mysterious mood, a curious numbness, or one doesn't remember until very much later, and doesn't even then know whether it was real or only a dream. Only a dream. In Traumnovelle, Fridolin feels like his wife has committed a horrible crime against him by simply wanting another man, and in Eyes Wide Shut, Bill himself is guilty of this very crime by pursuing several women over the course of a couple days, even though he never succeeds. The novel does not dismiss the couple's fantasies by saying that, fantasies don't matter and that they should just get over themselves. In fact, the story seems to say quite the contrary. Yes, fantasies and unfaithful desires are a major crime against your husband or wife. And the only way these sins can be resolved is if someone suffers the penalty for those desires, a fact which is signified, in the dream so to speak, by the sacrifice at Somerton. At the very least, someone has to pay for Bill's attempts to cheat on his wife, and the deeper symbolism seems to indicate that it is actually his wife herself who has to pay. Remember how in Traumnovelle, when Fridolin was looking for the woman who saved him, he comes to the realization that the woman he is really looking for is his wife. And in fact, an aspect of Traumnovelle which is not included in Eyes Wide Shut is the fact that in one of his wife's dreams, after Albertina cheats on Fridolin with several men, Fridolin himself is crucified, which symbolizes the fact that he had to pay for her sins in her dream. Just as, conversely, the wife is constantly rescuing the husband over his various adventures. In the economy of soul, or Geist, or whatever you want to call it, when someone wrongs you, an existential debt is established that has to be paid. If someone causes us some loss or pain or commits some legitimate injustice against us, then they owe us a loss or a pain of their own in return, just as someone who takes a car from me owes me a car in return. And in fact, in many ancient law codes, one stolen sheep would have to be repaid with 2 or multiple stolen sheep, which represents that idea that the offending party not only has to repay our losses, but also suffer their own actual loss. If we were to forgive this kind of theft, we would essentially be canceling that debt, saying, you don't owe me a car or a sheep at all. It's yours. You owe me nothing. And while this looks simple from the outside, from the inside, from the vantage point of where a debt sits in our hearts or minds, you can't just wave a hand and make a debt vanish. The reason why it's so difficult and painful to forgive is that it cannot be tossed aside. The only way to eliminate it from existence is to absorb the wrongdoing into yourself. Pain, dishonor, shame, or some other loss might be the price, and someone must always pay for it. Either you make someone else pay for it, or you yourself have to absorb that consequence. Even when it comes to releasing a money debt, or forgiving someone who stole your car, you are still, in the end, paying a very real price, accepting a real financial loss. So whenever we bind ourselves to another fallible human being, whether in marriage or some covenant of friendship, faithfulness to that person, fidelio, often requires us not only to proverbially save one another, but to absorb the wrong they do to us. We can only bear the burden of faithfulness, of being awake, of seeing one another for who we truly are, with all of our flaws, only if we are willing to lay our lives down for one another. The hope of forgiveness is really the shining light of this story. Quote, he had decided to tell her the story of the preceding night very soon, perhaps even the next day, but to tell it as though everything he had experienced had been a dream. Then, when she had fully realized the utter futility of his adventures, he would confess to her that they had been real. Real? He asked himself. And at this moment, he noticed something dark quite near Albertina's face. It had definite outlines, like the shadowy features of a human face, and it was lying on his pillow. For a moment, his heart stopped beating, but an instant later he saw what it was, and stretching out his hand, picked up the mask he had worn the night before. He must have lost it in the morning when making up his bundle, and the maid, or Albertina herself, had found it. Undoubtedly, Albertina, after making this find, suspected something, presumably more and worse things than had actually happened, and she intimated this by placing the mask on the pillow beside her, as though it signified his face, the face of her husband, who had become an enigma to her. This playful, almost joking action seemed to express both a gentle warning and her readiness to forgive. Eyes Wide Shut seems obsessed with revealing the dangers around every corner. In the words of Schnitzler's novel, there were dangers lurking everywhere and at all times, except that one usually forgets about them. However, the end of Kubrick's film is perhaps the most optimistic in all of his body of work. In the beginning, it seemed that marriage required deception. As the Hungarian told us, fulfilling your desires required you to deceive your spouse. And it also seemed like, in order to maintain a peaceful and functioning marriage, the husband and wife also had to go so far as to hide their very fantasies. If a wife revealed her dream, it would have bad consequences for the husband. When Alice reveals her dream, which mirrors the Somerton party, which is not meant to be revealed, it sets Bill off on a quest for revenge, a journey which could end in his demise. Now, however, we can see that they have been honest about themselves, that they are awake to each other, and their marriage is not over. We have seen that what the Master of Ceremonies said is not wholly true, just as the truth of one night is not the whole truth. Bill has revealed it to his wife, and whether or not there were any dire consequences, this is ultimately what has saved them and will make their marriage work. Not secrecy, but truth. The film also began with the idea that people cannot control their fantasies. And indeed, this may be true. At least it's true of people who are asleep. They cannot control whether or not they dream. But once they are awake, they can control their fantasies. And this is where Bill and Alice are now. And they must remain there. They must stop fantasizing about other people. The most important things in life are not just about what you do. They're about what you think, what you feel, what you dream, and what you will. The heart matters. It is a more powerful thing than you imagine. What does it matter if your lips are near to someone, flattering them with words, when your heart is far away? Bill is determined to remain awake. Indeed, to remain awake forever. Alice, however, is more hesitant, perhaps because she knows that it's easier said than done.
Forever.
Let's not use that word, you know. It frightens me. But I do love you.
While at first this kind of seems like a vibe killer, as if Alice is leaving room for the possibility that the two might not love each other or be faithful to one another at some point in the future, this exchange actually reveals something that is at the very heart of erotic feeling. Namely, that love, erotic love, is an emotion which makes big promises, even eternal promises, but which, on the other hand, as an emotion, rarely actually lasts forever, at least in the same initial fiery intensity. In the last piece of writing that he ever published, C.S. Lewis commented on the kind of illusions which erotic love often gives people. Quote, "It is part of the nature of a strong erotic passion, as distinct from a transient fit of appetite, that makes more towering promises than any other emotion. No doubt, all our desires make promises, but not so impressively. To be in love involves the almost irresistible conviction that one will go on being in love until one dies, and that possession of the beloved will confer not merely frequent ecstasies, but settled, fruitful, deep-rooted, lifelong happiness. Hence, all seems to be at stake. If we miss this chance, we shall have lived in vain. At the very thought of such a doom, we sink into fathomless depths of self-pity. Unfortunately, these promises are found often to be quite untrue. Every experienced adult knows this to be so as regards all erotic passions, except the one that he himself is feeling at the moment. We discount the world without end pretensions of our friends' amours easily enough. We know that such things sometimes last and sometimes don't. And when they do last, this is not because they promised at the outset to do so. When two people achieve lasting happiness, this is not solely because they are great lovers, but because they are also, I must put it crudely, good people, controlled, loyal, fair-minded, mutually adaptable people. The most important thing that Bill and Alice can do is to work on being faithful in the present, an important element of which is putting fantasies aside and reaffirming the living, physical reality of one another by reconsummating their relationship as soon as possible.